Wow, you guys really liked my structure series. Message received. In the couple of months since those videos have come out, I've actually been receiving tons and tons of requests down in the comment section for other things about structures that I can cover. So here we are, Structures episode 3, and I am going to just basically go over a whole bunch of little things that I think are important to know if you're going to be making your own structure data packs. This episode won't be nearly as straightforward and structured as the last two, no pun intended. Instead, I'm basically just going to be giving a whole bunch of little tips on things to help you build slightly better structure packs. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get into the first structure data pack tip. And this is actually something that's incredibly simple, but I've received a ton of requests for it down in the comments, so I figured it would be good to cover. When you're making a structure pack, one thing you might very frequently want to put into your builds is loot chests. And a question I very frequently receive is, how do I actually randomize the loot that goes in these chests? It is a pretty simple and straightforward process. The first thing you're going to do is identify the name of the loot table that you want to use. Now, it's perfectly fine to just go into your data pack and make a loot table yourself, but it's also perfectly reasonable to just take a vanilla loot table and put it in this chest instead. And that is what I'm going to do. This is meant to be a shepherd house, I do believe, if Raven told me that correctly. So let's go ahead and make this just regular vanilla shepherd loot. Now, in order to find the name of the vanilla loot table that you want, you can just type /loot give @s loot, and then the autofill will give you a list of loot tables that you can scroll through. Now, most of the ones that go in villages are called Minecraft chest/village. And then you can scroll through all the different village chests that there are. So I wanted it to be the shepherd, right? So you can click that. Now, I'm not actually going to run this command. What I'm going to do is highlight that piece right there and just copy it. And the next thing I'm going to do is put the loot table into this chest. So in order to do that, you just type /data, modify, block. And if you're aiming at the block, the coordinates of the block should show up in your autofill. So just press tab until you do that, and then say loot table, spelled exactly like that, and it is case sensitive, set value in quotes, and then you just paste the name of the loot table that you got from the loot command earlier. And if I hit enter, it says I modified the block data. Now, what I've just done is I have put that loot table in this chest. The most important thing to remember from here on out is that you can no longer open that chest. I'll show you what happens if I do open it. I opened it up, oh, and look, there's some shepherd loot. But now, since I've opened this chest, well, the chest no longer contains that loot table. All it contains is 2 wool blocks. So if I were to save the structure right now, every time this house gets placed down, you would always be able to come up to this chest and open it and see these 2 wool blocks in these exact positions. Now, for random loot, that's not what you want. So since I've opened the chest, all I have to do is just run the same command all over again. And now that I've modified the block with the loot table, those wool blocks were actually removed by me doing that. And now the chest has its loot table again. So as long as I don't open this chest, if I go save the structure now, well, every time this structure gets generated, it will have random shepherd loot in this chest. And it will be different every time. So that's about it. And of course, afterward, I just have to remember to save the structure. Which, by the way, if you saw that name and you saw, everything that's around me right now, yes, Raven and I are actually building another village. This will be our 7th one. And this one's kind of going for like a New Orleans swamp Creole kind of vibe. And it will spawn in swamps. So this will be a swamp village for those of you who want swamp villages. By the time this video comes out, it should be posted up on Planet Minecraft, so you can download it down in the description. Okay, so that's loot chests, and that's really all there is to it. It works with chests, it works with barrels, and literally any block that can hold items, with the weird exception of brewing stands for some reason, but don't worry about that. Let's get on to the next thing, and this is something that I haven't really received a request for, but it is quite important, and it's something I hadn't included until very, very recently when I learned what it did, and I figured I'd show it off here because it's cool, and if you're building villages, it's very, very important. So here I am back in my data pack. I just go into the namespace, world gen, and I want to go into the structure set, which is something I covered in episode 1. If I open up the structure set, you'll see that I've actually added a new field, this exclusion zone. Before, when you would spawn our villages, it was actually pretty common that these villages would overlap and conflict with other vanilla villages. If you remember from my last episode, when I went and tested out the Wild Western village, it had actually kind of halfway destroyed a savannah village. As funny as that can be, it can be helpful to prevent it when you want to. And that's exactly what this exclusion zone does. In layman's terms, what this piece of code has done is said that my villages cannot be within 8 chunks of a vanilla village. This other set is the name of a structure set that appears in the vanilla game. So believe it or not, the names of structure sets are actually used somewhere. I stand corrected. The vanilla structure set is just called Minecraft Villages, and this chunk count 8 means that any structure placed by this structure set, so really just this structure, cannot be within 8 chunks of any structure placed by this structure set, which is the Minecraft Villages. It helps prevent conflicts, and that's about all there is to it. So let's move on to the next things. Okay, so from here on out, everything that I'm going to be showing off is actually stuff that has been added to the game since I made my last episode. This is all really, really new stuff. We're in version 1.20.4 right now, that's what I'm recording in. And as of that update, there are several new things you can do with structure generation. Now for the first one, I'm actually going to go ahead and run back to the Wild West build site, maybe jog your memory just a little bit, and here we are. Okay, so if you remember from episode 2, I was explaining why I only use 4 road pieces, or sometimes 5, and I was explaining why, for example, this piece is basically 2 pieces in one. The jigsaws on both of its ends have the same name, so this one's called T-Bird's Road. Over here, this other one is also called T-Bird's Road, which basically means that when a jigsaw block is trying to generate this piece, it can either connect to this piece and then have the road go that way, or it can connect to this piece and have the road go that way. Now, something new that has been added to the game since I made that episode is that we can now control which of these 2 jigsaws the game prefers to place. You may notice that jigsaw interfaces do look a little bit different now, namely we have these 2 fields down here called selection priority and placement priority. Now, the first thing I'm going to be talking about is selection priority because it is definitely the easier of the 2 to understand. Let's say just hypothetically that I were to increase the selection priority of this piece up to 1. So now this piece has a priority of 1, and this piece has a priority of 0. What that means is that whenever the game tries to call this piece, it will always try to connect this one first, and if that fails, then it will try to connect to this one. So I've essentially removed the randomness from this piece. It now tries to turn left before it tries to turn right, and if it can turn left, it will never turn right. That is the gist of what selection priority does. Now I've moused over it right now, and the game has an official description for what it is, and with both this one and the one for placement priority, I first took a look at these and just read them like 3 or 4 times, and I could not make heads or tails of what these were trying to say. So hopefully my explanations today shed a little bit more light on what selection and placement priority actually do. But yeah, what I've already explained is basically the gist of selection priority. This piece is trying to get placed down. There are 2 possible jigsaws that can be connected successfully. The one with the higher selection priority will try to be placed first, and if it fails, then it'll go to the other one. It's as simple as that. However, because I want to keep the roads random, the best way to do that is just to make the priorities the same. They default to 0, so I'll just set this one back to 0. And if you set them to 0, you have recovered the random behavior that was in place before those priority options were added, which is good. That's what we want for roads. Now, the next question in your mind might be, okay, where on earth would I ever use selection priority? Well, let's take this house for example. This house is much wider than it is long, right? So it takes up more space left and right than it does front to back. Now let's say I really wanted this house to generate, and it was okay if it were actually able to generate on the side instead. So I could just as easily place a jigsaw block right here, and then it would connect to the road kinda sideways. Now if I were gonna do that, I would want to set the selection priority of this front block to be higher than the one on the side. Basically what that would be saying is, okay, if this house has been selected, you try to use this jigsaw to connect it first, because you want it to be facing the road. However, because it's wider, that takes up more space and there's a bigger chance it'll fail. So if that fails, well then you have another option to try it again on its side, but only after the front has failed. And that is more or less the use behind selection priority, at least as far as I can think of. Okay, so we've done selection priority, what about placement priority? Well, this one's actually significantly harder to grasp, and honestly, I've done some testing with it. I'm not 100% sure my explanation is even completely correct. I do have an explanation, and I have a way that I think it works, but if anyone else knows better and I end up being wrong, please let me know down in the comments. But I am going to try my best to explain how it works, and I'll use a few visual aids while I'm at it. So I'm going to walk a little bit further away from the village because I'm going to try to kind of simulate how the villages are getting generated. And I'm going to need to actually do this step by step in order to even begin explaining what placement priority really is. So let's say that I have placed down a structure, and everything I do from here on out is going to kind of be going like step by step in the intermediate steps of how the structure generates, like from moment to moment within your computer. So I place down a structure, and the first thing that happens is that the town center spawns, and I'm using this one as an example. From there, the town center branches off into roads, which I'll spawn a few of those as well. Okay, so I've tried to kind of simulate what would happen if, for example, the town center spawned the straight road in all 4 of its main directions. So now, ignoring all like the villagers and cats and stuff that would be spawning on the town center, the next thing that's going to be happening is that the roads are going to start using their jigsaws to generate structures and also more roads. And this is where placement priority comes in. I'm actually going to place back this structure block so I can very clearly see the bounding box of the town center, and we can see which jigsaws belong to which piece. At this stage of the generation, the thing that becomes important is the placement priority of the jigsaw blocks that were in the town center, so these jigsaws right here. Obviously, all of their placement priority defaults to 0, but let's say, for example, that this one had a higher priority. So this one has a priority of 1, all the rest of the ones on the town center still have a priority of 0. To my understanding, what this accomplishes is that this road that connects to the one that has 1 priority will start spawning the things around it before any of the other roads do. Oh, okay, so I kind of did the visual aid wrong, but you get the idea, right? This road right here will start spawning buildings around it, and, you know, the jigsaws would actually connect correctly before any of the other roads start spawning their own buildings. Now remember, that was caused by the fact that the jigsaw on the town center had a higher placement priority. In fact, it had nothing to do with the placement priority of any of these jigsaws that were on the road, which is really weird. I have no idea why they did it like this, but that seems to be the way it is. Now, as for uses for something like this, quite frankly, I got nothing. Okay, like, on the official changelog, they actually said that this could allow for depth-first generation, which if you're not familiar with coding algorithms and stuff, depth-first in this case would basically mean that everything relating to this road is completely generated and done before anything relating to any of the other roads. And yeah, you can do that. I just cannot for the life of me think of why you would want to, but you know what, it is what it is. If you can think of a use for it, then great for you, I'm happy. Please let me know. Okay, so that's about all I've personally got to say about selection and placement priority, and the final thing that I want to cover today is actually something completely different that I totally love. And in fact, in the process of showing you how it works, I'm actually going to be using it myself for the very first time as I finish up my coding of this Creole Swamp village. If you've been following Minecraft snapshots really closely, you might remember a feature that was added a couple of months ago called Pool Aliasing. Currently in vanilla, Pool Aliases are only used by the new trial chambers, which aren't even in the game yet, so I believe they were added specifically to be used in the trial chambers. But even though the trial chambers aren't in the game yet, the alias system actually is, so we can use it to its full functionality in version 1.20.4. And it was described in the changelog as being able to take a template pool and replace it with another template pool throughout an entire structure. Now, that's not a wonderful explanation, so hopefully me doing it for you will further convince you of why it is useful. In terms of making the Creole village, I've pretty much coded everything into the game except these last 5 decorations. Now, these are all various types of grave sites. Now, what Raven and I kind of want to do with these grave sites is we want to make it so that each village can only spawn one type of gravesite. When the village first gets placed down, it picks one of these 5, and then from then on out, anytime that village places a gravesite, it will always place the same type, which is the type it picked right at the beginning. Which will make it kind of interesting. You know, you can't find all of these all in one village. You have to walk around to different villages in order to be able to actually find all of them. So let's get started on coding that up. So I'm in my data pack once again. I'm going to go into WorldGen structure, and then I'm just going to open up the structure file of the new structure that I'm adding. So the first thing I'm going to do in this file is add a new field called Pool Aliases, and it's going to be a list of objects. I'm only going to add one of these objects. The first thing I'm going to say is type is random. And the second thing I'm going to add to this object is this alias field. This is what I'm going to actually be putting in the structure blocks that spawn the grave sites themselves. So as you can see, I've actually gone to the jigsaw blocks on my roads, and I have put their target pool as the same name that I just put into that alias. I'm going to call it Grave A because there are multiple different grave pools, but I want all of them to be called A because that's the way the alias works. So back in this structure file, the next thing I'm going to do is add another field called targets, which is also a list of objects, and each of those objects has data and weight, just like a loot table. And I am going to actually copy this and paste it a bunch of times. Just add more objects to the list. Okay, so now that I have actually written this out completely, I can kind of explain what's going on here. What this basically says is that when the structure first gets placed down, it selects one of these 5 names right here. And whichever one it selects will persist across the entire instance of that structure. Now, it'll be different for every structure that gets placed down, but for every piece inside one structure, it will always be the same. Now, what it does with that name that it selects is that every time it sees this name inside a Jigsaw block, it replaces it with whatever it selected. So I have equal weights for all of them. I could also increase the weights of these if I wanted one of these to be more likely than the other. And you'll notice that I actually included the same one. So grave A is the same as grave A right here. So if it selects this option, what I've basically told it is that just keep it the same and don't change it. As you may have guessed, these names right here are actually the names of template pools. So I need to go create a template pool called grave A, and grave A is only going to contain this first grave site right here. Grave B will only contain this one, grave C will only contain this one, and so on and so forth. Now, if you look on the wiki, there's actually a couple other things you can do with aliases. So I've selected this random option right here, but you can also use direct, which basically says take any ID and replace it with the target template pool, which I'm not really sure why you would do that, because you could just go ahead and put this in all the Jigsaw blocks to begin with, but I mean, that's an option if you want to do that for whatever reason. And then down here we also have random group. So basically, the random group basically just selects a group of aliases. Okay, so the next step for me is to actually go and make all of the template pools that contain these graves, and then this alias will work properly whenever I place down the structure. Alright, so I actually did go ahead and finish up the data pack. That was basically the last thing I needed to do, and then I just kind of needed to resave the structures, orient the data pack a little bit. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually go and create a new world, test to see if I can find some villages, and see if our changes applied. Kind of excited. Okay, so I messed up. I got into my single player world, was flying around to villages, and was like, why are none of the graves spawning? Well, if you can see the obvious problem right in front of me, I totally just forgot to put jigsaws on these. There we go, and I'll just grab this and put it on the rest of them. Okay, and then I'm gonna save all of them. Okay, so now whenever these get called by a template pool, the jigsaw should connect to the jigsaw that called it, which is what I've been telling you this whole time and what I definitely should have known. Okay, I will be back when I'm actually testing this on a single player world. I will see you in just a second. Okay, so I've booted up a single player world. It looks like I found a village, and this one's huge and gorgeous. Oh my gosh. And it looks like this one actually did spawn a gravestone. Now, these things are big enough and there's few enough jigsaws that they're actually kind of rare. I couldn't find a village that spawned 2 of these, but if I had found a village with 2, you would have seen that every single gravesite that appeared in this particular village looks exactly like this. Now, if you'll notice, this is not the one that I called A. This is not the very first one. In fact, I think this was C. And I never had a single jigsaw that was explicitly calling grave C. Every single one of them called grave A. But the thing that caused grave C to spawn instead was the alias. When this village got placed down, it randomly decided that C was going to replace A everywhere, and then when it called A right here, well, C actually got spawned. And that is how aliases work. So yeah, that's really gonna do it. Those were 5 things that, some of which I've been requested and some of which I just thought were worth it to cover in a video. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it was helpful. Leave a comment if it was. And by the way, this village, if you like what you see, is available to download on Planet Minecraft in the description, so go ahead and get it if you want. Join my new Discord server, which I set up a couple days ago, if you want to as well. And I will see you all later. Thank you so much for watching, my dudes.